The town of Ardith Wells had a verdict on Della Honce, and it delivered it the way it delivered the mail, plainly and to every door. No decent man would wed a woman who broke her own horses, argued prices with the stockman, and answered the preacher back in the road. She was 29 that autumn, and she heard the verdict the way she heard wind under the eaves, steady, expected, not worth turning her head for. She stood in the dust outside Ledbetter's store with a green colt on a lead rope, and the colt was dancing, and the men along the rail were watching to see her fail. She did not fail. She put her shoulder to the colt's shoulder, breathed once, and the animal settled under her hand, like water, finding its level. Mrs. Cornelia Pratt, the banker's wife, watched from the boardwalk with her gloved hands folded and her chin set, and she said it loud enough to carry the way she said everything she meant, the street to keep. There goes the Honce girl, wild as her stock. A man would sooner marry the weather. The women near her made the small sounds women make when they agree without wanting the blame for it. Somebody laughed. The colt's ears flicked toward the laugh, and Della laid 2 fingers against its neck, and the ears came back to her. They called her the Honce girl, though she had buried her father 2 winters back and run his quarter section alone since, 11 horses and a dry creek and a barn that leaned the way a tired man leans. They called her Outspoken, when what they meant was that she would not be quiet and grateful for less than she was owed. The stockman shorted her on a sound gelding in the spring, and she had told them so in front of the loading pens, and the town had decided that day what kind of woman says such a thing. The kind no decent man would have. The kind who would grow old in a leaning barn with her horses for company and nobody to bring a doctor when the cold finally took her. Della led the colt home that afternoon down the river road with the cottonwoods going gold and the dust rising behind her boot heels. She did not cry. She had made a decision a long time ago, on the day they put her father down, not to give this town the satisfaction of her face breaking. She fed the stock and pumped the trough full and stood a while in the blue coming dark watching the horses move, and the only thing in the whole county that had ever looked at her without a verdict in its eyes was an animal. That was a hard thing to know about a place. She knew it anyway. She banked the stove and slept, and in the morning everything would have been the same forever, except that in the morning she found him. He was lying in the wet grass at the bottom of her south fence, where the river fog had not yet burned off. A great dark stain spread across the side of his coat, a foundered bay horse standing over him with its head down. Della was at the fence before she had decided to be. She knelt in the cold wet and turned him by the shoulder, and his face came up gray as ash. A man near 40, a hard, clean-shaven jaw gone slack, dark hair matted at the temple where another wound had bled and dried. Pinned inside his coat, where a man keeps the thing he does not want taken off his body, was a tin star worn smooth at the points, a territorial Marshal, shot a day ago and maybe more, and he had ridden until he could not ride, and the horse had carried him onto the one piece of ground in the county where the woman who found him would not first ask what the town would say. She did not ask it. She got him up across her own shoulders the way she got a downed foal up, with her knees and her back and a sound low in her throat, and she carried him to the barn because the barn was nearer than the house and warmer than the morning, and she laid him in the clean straw of the foaling stall. If you've ever watched a good person get written off by everyone around them and quietly wanted, just once, to see somebody finally look at them straight and see what is actually there, then you already belong here, and you should take a moment to subscribe, because the people who do are the ones this channel is for, and the overlooked one proven worthy is the only kind of story I tell. She cut the coat away from the wound with her shears. The ball had gone through the meat above his hip and out, which was the only mercy in it, and the graze along his skull had knocked the sense from him, but not the life. She had set a horse's torn shoulder with yarrow and clean linen, and a steady hand more times than the doctor in Ardith Wells had set anything sober. She did for the Marshal what she would have done for a good animal, because it was the only doctoring she trusted, and there was no one else. And when she had packed and bound the wound, she sat back on her heels and breathed, and did not yet let herself think what it would mean when the town learned the Honce girl had a strange man in her barn. She thought about it by noon, because by noon Cornelia Pratt's hired girl had seen the strange, foundered horse from the river road, and by supper half the county knew. Della did not change what she was doing. She boiled willow bark and got it between his teeth, a spoon at a time, and kept the stall warm. On the second night the fever climbed, and he talked, low and broken, to people who were not there, a woman's name once, and then a string of harder names, the men he had been hunting, and Della understood without being told that whoever had put the ball through him would want to know he had not died of it. She loaded her father's old rifle and set it inside the barn door. She had never aimed it at a man. She found, in the lamplight, with his fever talk going on, that she would. On the fourth morning he woke. She was sponging his forehead, and his eyes opened, dark and clear and entirely present, and they went first to the rifle by the door, then to the tin star she had set on the ledge where he could see it, then to her face. He did not thank her. A man like that, she would learn, did not waste the breath. He looked at her a long moment, taking the measure of the room the way she took the measure of a green horse, and what he said first, in a voice like gravel under a slow wheel, was, "You bound it clean. Who taught you?" Not a soft word in it. But it was the first thing anyone in 2 years had said to her that was a question about what she could do, and not a verdict about what she was. "Nobody," Della said. "I taught myself on the horses." The corner of his mouth moved once and came back. "Good hands," he said. And that was all. It should not have been anything. It undid something in her the whole town's noise had never reached. If you've made it this far into Della's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He could not yet stand, and so he lay in her foaling stall and watched her work the yard through the open door, and Della found herself working closer to that door than the chores required. On the third evening he asked her to bring him the saddlebag off the bay before anyone else thought to look in it, and she did, and from it he took a folded oilcloth packet soft with handling, and he held it a while before he spoke. "My wife," he said. 3 years gone. The fever." He did not look up. "She wrote this the week before, when she knew. Made me carry it. Said a man who hunts men forgets what he's keeping the law for, and on the day I forgot, I was to read it." His thumb moved over the worn fold. "I've read it maybe 40 times. I read it the night Sutter's men were at the fire, and I knew how it would likely go." He held the letter out to her, this thing he had carried through fever and gunfire and a day across the saddle, and Della understood the size of what she was being handed. "Read it," he said. "I want you to know what kind of man I'm trying to be, before this town decides for you what kind I am." She read it by lamplight in the straw. It was short. The dead woman had written, in a careful, schooled hand, "Caleb, you will want to be hard, because hard does not hurt. But the law is not the hard thing. The law is the gentle thing we build, so the hard things have somewhere to break against. Find the one who is gentle and steady when nobody is making her be, and you build your life there, because that is the only ground that holds." Della read it twice. Then she folded it along its soft, worn creases and gave it back, and her hands were not entirely steady, and Caleb watched her hands and saw it, the way he saw everything. Neither of them said what had moved in the room. He put the letter back in the oilcloth and the oilcloth against his chest, and Della went out to bank the stove, and stood a long time in the cold with the horses breathing around her, holding the shape of words a dying woman had written to a man she would never see again, and feeling for the first time in 2 years like she was standing on ground that might hold. His name was Caleb Reyes, and he was a deputy marshal out of the territorial court 3 counties east, and he had been carrying papers on a man named Sutter who ran cattle that were not his through this country every fall, and Sutter's men had caught him on the river and left him for the magpies. He told her this slowly over the next 2 days, not because he wanted her to know, but because she had earned the truth by keeping him alive, and a man like Caleb paid his debts in the coin he had, which was honesty. He told her, too, that the men who had shot him would not believe he was dead until they had looked at the body, and that he was sorry to bring that onto her ground, and Della said the ground was hers to bring trouble onto if she chose, and that she chose. And he looked at her a while and did not argue. The town did not leave them to it for long. On the 5th day, Cornelia Pratt came out the river road in her husband's buggy with 2 of the churchwomen and stopped at the gate and would not come in. And Della crossed the yard to her, wiping her hands on her apron, and Cornelia looked past her at the barn and the foundered bay and said, in the warm, careful voice she used for the cruelest things, "We came out of Christian concern, Della, a woman alone and a man in her barn. People are saying things. I would be failing you not to tell you what they're saying." Della stood in her own yard and felt the old verdict come down again, heavier now, because there was a witness to it lying 30 feet away in the straw. "Then you've told me," she said. "You can go." Cornelia's face tightened. "There's no need to be hard. I'm trying to protect your name." "My name," Della said, "is the one thing this town never let me keep. You'll forgive me if I don't hand you what's left of it to mind." The buggy turned around in the road. From the barn, though she did not know it yet, Caleb had dragged himself to the stall door on his elbows and heard every word, and the thing that came into his face was not pity. The days that followed were the kind the town never sees and never credits. Caleb mended slow. He learned to stand, then to cross the yard with a hand on the fence, and because he could not yet do a man's work, he did what he could, which was watch, and a man who has hunted other men for a living watches well. He saw which gelding favored a 4-foot before Della did. He saw the place in the south fence where the wire had been cut and twisted back to look whole, and he went very still looking at it, because a cut fence on the ground where Sutter's men had left him was not weather and was not accident. He did not tell her to be afraid. He told her instead where her father's rifle would do the most good, and he cleaned it himself, sitting on an upturned bucket in the sun, slow and one-handed, and Della brought him coffee without being asked and set it on the rail beside him, and neither of them remarked on it, and that was its own kind of language, the cup set down without a word, the small care neither one named. She brought a plate to the barn each night and stayed while he ate. She had not sat across from another grown person at a meal since her father died. The first nights they hardly talked. Then they talked, the way 2 careful people talk, around the edges and then closer, about horses and about the dead, and about the particular loneliness of being the one in a place that everybody has decided about. He told her she had the best hands he'd seen on stock, man or woman, and that the stockmen who shorted her had known the gelding was sound and shorted her anyway because they could, and hearing a hard, honest man say plainly the thing she had known and been called a liar for knowing was a stranger comfort than any kindness. She told him she had stopped going to church not because she had stopped believing, but because she could not bear the back pew and the turned heads, and he said after a while that his wife would have liked her, and that was the nearest either of them had come to saying the other thing. The dead woman's words came back to Della as she banked the stove those nights. The line about the gentle thing built so the hard things have somewhere to break against, and she understood that the Marshal had read it 40 times not to grieve, but to remember what he was for. She thought a person could spend a whole life being the hard thing the world expected and never once be the ground anyone chose to stand on. She had been the hard thing. She had had to be. But a letter from a woman she would never meet had named another way, and the man it was written to was lying in her barn becoming the proof of it. Sutter sent 2 men on a cold, bright morning near the end of the month. They came up the river road openly, the way men come who do not expect a woman alone to be anything but afraid, and they meant to find out whether the marshal had died in the grass or somewhere a body could be found and finished. Della was in the yard with the green colt. She saw them turn in at the gate, and she felt the old fear, and under it, newer and steadier, something that was not fear at all. She did not run for the barn. Running would tell them where to look. She kept her hands on the colt, and she watched them come. 2 riders, one heavy and one lean, the lean one with his hand resting easy near his hip, and the heavy one already smiling the smile men use on women they have decided are alone. "Morning, missus," the heavy one said. "Looking for a man might have come through hurt. Friend of ours. Owes us." Della looked at him the way she looked at a horse that bites. "No men here," she said. "Just me and the stock, same as the whole county will tell you. The whole county's got an opinion on me being alone." The lean one nudged his horse toward the barn, and from the barn door, on his own 2 feet, one hand braced on the frame, and the other holding her father's rifle level and steady, Caleb Reyes said, "She's not alone." Everything in the yard slowed. The lean one's hand twitched toward his hip and stopped, because the rifle did not waver, and a man knows the difference between a frightened person holding a gun and a man who has done it before. "I'm a deputy marshal of the territorial court," Caleb said in the gravel voice, unhurried. "You're the 2 that left me on the river. There's a federal judge 3 counties east who will want your names, and there's a woman standing in this yard who set my wound and kept me breathing, and if either of you so much as turns his horse wrong, I will not miss, and she will swear in any court that it was clean. Now you can ride to that judge ahead of the paper, or you can ride behind it, your choice. Make it from the saddle, and make it now." They made it from the saddle. They backed their horses to the gate and turned them, and did not gallop, because galloping is what guilty men do, but they did not waste time either, and the dust hung in the cold, bright air a long while after they were gone. Della stood with her hand still on the colt's neck, and the colt had not so much as shifted, because her hand had stayed steady the whole time, and she understood that she had been the calm thing in the yard, and Caleb the calm thing in the door, and that between the 2 of them there had not been one moment of panic for the horse to feel. Caleb lowered the rifle, and his arm was shaking now that it was over, the wound paying him back for standing, and Della crossed the yard and got her shoulder under his arm the way she had the first morning, and walked him back to the bucket in the sun, and this time when she set him down, she did not let go right away, and he did not ask her to. The 2 riders, it turned out, did ride to the judge ahead of the paper, because frightened men looking to save their own necks make the calculations Caleb had counted on. Sutter was taken at his fall gather with the stolen brands still wet on the calves, on the word of 2 men trading their testimony for their lives, and the territorial court sent a rider out the river road in the first week of true cold to take Marshal Reyes's account, and the rider's coming was seen, the way everything was seen in that country. He stopped first in town for directions, and he told the men at Ledbetter's, plainly and with respect, that he was come to thank the woman who had sheltered a wounded officer of the court and helped bring in the worst cattle thief the territory had seen in a decade, and the men at the rail who had watched Della fail with a green colt and been disappointed when she did not, stood there and had nothing to say. It was Cornelia Pratt who had the hardest time of it, though no one made her suffer, and that was the point. She came to church the next Sunday, and Della was there, in the 3rd pew now, and not the back, with Caleb beside her, standing slow but standing, his star on his coat, where the whole congregation could see it, and Cornelia met Della's eyes across the aisle, and found that all her careful, warm words had nowhere to land. She inclined her head, the smallest motion, the nearest a proud woman comes to being wrong in public, and Della inclined hers back, and that was all, and it was enough, because Della had never wanted the town on its knees. She had only wanted to stand in it without a verdict pressing down on her, and now she did. And the woman who had pressed hardest was the one who had to look away first. Caleb did not ride east when the cold broke. He had a letter from a dead woman that told him where a man builds his life, and he had found the ground she meant, gentle and steady when nobody was making her be, standing in a leaning barn, doctoring a stranger because it was right, and not because it would be seen. He asked her on an ordinary evening with no flourish at all, the plate of supper between them in the lamplight, the horses settling in the dark beyond the door. He said he had no fine words, that words were not what he had to offer, and that a man who had been given his life twice did not intend to be a fool about where he spent the rest of it. He said she was free to say no, that he would mend a ranch hand's wages out of it and ride on and trouble her no more, and that nobody was hurrying her, and he meant it, and she could see he meant it, and that was why she said yes. They were married in the spring in the church at Ardith Wells, and the town came, because a town will always come to see the thing it was wrong about. And Della wore her mother's dress, and Caleb wore his star, and afterward they did not stay for the talk. They drove the river road home in the long gold light with the cottonwoods leafing out green. And the south fence was mended right now, the cut wire replaced, and the barn that had leaned was braced and true. And there were 13 horses in the paddock, and a man on the seat beside her who had never once, not on the first gray morning or any morning since, looked at her with a verdict in his eyes. On the porch that first married evening, Caleb took out the oilcloth packet and the worn letter and held it a while in the last of the light, and then he did a thing Della did not expect. He gave it to her to keep. "She told me to find the ground that holds," he said. "I found it. You keep the letter now. You're the one who is it." And Della took the soft worn paper from the hands of the man who had carried it through fever and gunfire, and she understood that she had been handed the most that he had, and she put it in the cedar box with her father's watch and her mother's ring, the small things a life is built on, and she banked the stove, and they sat on the porch in the dark while the horses moved soft in the paddock, and nobody in the whole county had a verdict left that mattered to either of them. A town will tell you for years what a person is, and a town is almost never lying, only looking from too far off to see. The ones worth keeping are the ones who come close enough to see you whole and then choose to stay. That was tonight's story from the Hearth and Homestead, and if it warmed you, pull your chair up again soon. So tell me, when the whole town has already decided about you, would you spend your life trying to change its verdict? Or would you simply build your life on the one ground that holds and let the town keep its talk?